Hey there, this is Dan. You're watching the Salty Sea, and this is going to be my tournament report for the Nova Open. We had our first real tournament of 2.0. There's going to be another one in Oslo, Norway this coming weekend, so I'm looking forward to seeing what the lists are from that. I will do a list review of both of the tournaments, in the pretty near future here. But for now, I'm going to do my tournament report for Nova. Go through my list, everyone I played against, and I think it's going to be really fun. So I had a really good time. This is the list I brought. You can see my poor Mizzen Master broke in transit, but we got him fixed up. I call them Sunset Securities, or that's why I started off calling them. The KO are kind of painted in sort of sunsetty colors with sort of the wet blend from yellow to purple. And then, of course, they stopped by in Tempest Eye to pick up some contracts, and brought a Tempest Eye Old Guard and a Tempest Lords Evocator Prime on Dracoline with Grand Stave with them. So, I swear this is a narrative list, right? Um, a buddy of mine calls it the Thundercat Daycare Center because the Thundercat is huge, and he says everyone else looks like babies next to it. That could be, you could call it that too, honestly. This was a pretty solid list. I liked it a lot. I did quite a bit of testing with it to kind of come to this conclusion. I tried a few different things. Um, that said, it wasn't actually my first choice. My first choice was going to be I wanted to try to do reaction control with Ossiarch Bone Reapers. Um, Ordered the models, they didn't ship in time. I also tried to do Chimera Nurgle, but I couldn't find a Chimera anywhere in the Twin Cities. Um, so, I could have ordered it, but at that point, shipping would have been tough as far as like building and painting it as well. And then I also didn't have a another box of Arcanaut Company to test the full swarm list. Now, that said, I did test a list that had a few more Arcanaut than I ended up with. I only brought 6 Arcanaut Company. And the thing that I found was that you really want the Tempest Eye ally. I think it has. I had kind of at first said to myself, well, obviously it's very important in round 1 to get into position, but how important is it really in later rounds? And I found that it had a lot of play in later rounds, and often would kind of become a huge target because of what it could do in later rounds, as far as either running away or running to things or just getting these little dwarves around the board. It was really solid just all the time. It also kind of gives a pseudo third threat. It only really did actual damage in one of my 4 games, but it was good to have around and at least, have a threat of damage. Um, the other thing was the Thunder Primes have been really good in testing, and so I don't know if you would have, because you could get rid of that Thunder Prime for 6 Caradron Overlords, but I don't think you'd really want to. It was just so good both in testing, and then it was good in the tournament as well. There's also just having a Thunder Prime and a Mizzen Master means that any round where I roll a quad, just nothing on the board is safe. Nothing whatsoever anywhere. So, I don't like building around quads, but being able to take advantage of Rampage is really nice, and having things that are really scary with Rampage is really nice to have. So, I already talked about, I guess, why I didn't go pure swarm, but in testing, Slaanesh Sybarites also were able to clear the swarm pretty quickly and win on objectives in the late game. So I do think, in general, you can do swarm lists, and I think my list might have actually been soft to a 15 model swarm list, but you really want to have bullies to clear out mid-range size models, to go toe-to-toe with other bully size models. Things like Reaper was one of the missions that we played. Those things, it's important to have sort of bully models. Also, any treasure or a mission like Cursed Relic, it's nice to have a big chunky thing that can hold the treasure. So going pure swarm, I do think it's viable. I think it's absolutely something you can do, but I don't think it's strictly better or anything like that. So going in, I wanted to think about what I'm soft to, right? So my first thought was I was a little worried about Stormcast, specifically Toughness 6 Stormcast in Vindictors and Protectors. I was actually worried about both of those models or things that would be sort of based around those models because the worry was that my Thunder Prime and Mizzen Master can kill both of them, but not really efficiently. They both have Strength 5, which was really nice all day at the tournament, but specifically against Strength or Toughness 6 is a disaster. And I thought I might see either a mostly Vindictor list or a mostly Protector list, and I didn't see them. So shout outs to Justin Smith. You know, he is the one true lover of Protectors. I've kind of poo-pooed them at various times. I was saying even just the other day that I think they're really mission dependent. However, I will say that I think my list is soft to them, and I think Protectors are good. I'm also, I think, a little soft to Chimera and Zombie Dragons. I was really worried about them going into the tournament. I tested multiple times against them. I was really worried about like what I call the Chimera one-shot watch because it can one-shot any unit in the game, and just what was it gonna kill in one hit at this tournament? Now I did see a Terrorgeist, which is basically a zombie dragon, but you know what I noticed in testing is that monsters, when they have to chase you, they're pretty balanced, but when you have to come to them, they're really busted. So things like objective missions. I think that they're a really hard counter to mid-range lists. I was really close to bringing Slaanesh to this tournament, and monsters just completely blow Slaanesh out of the water because it's these, you know, 110 to 200 point models that have gotten a lot better overall recently, and I think are viable, and you know, Stormcast I think is good, but I think monsters are just a hard counter to them. I also wonder if the rise of monsters has created kind of a net meta, and we'll be talking about that quite a bit when we review the 3-in-1 or better lists from this tournament. I also just wondered if Soulblight Gravelord's Swarm is just a better version of Kharadron Overlord's Swarm, and that might just be something that I would have been weak to if I'd seen it. Who knows? I still haven't seen Soulblight Gravelords in action with their new points. I also want to just go on to, I know I'm going through a long way before I get to my first games, but I really wanted to get kind of what I thought were the best lists before the tournament, and I'll talk about it after too. So before the tournament, I was thinking Chimera lists and Soulblight Gravelord minion lists were going to be the two sort of poles of the metagame. And I was thinking Tier 2 was going to be Chaos, kind of lead from the back blenders. You know, I was thinking about Slaanesh. I was thinking about, you know, Skaven allies in all sorts of different Chaos factions. I still think that's something you can do, although we didn't see it at this tournament. I was also really worried about Stormcast mid-range, like Protector spam, Vindictor spam. And then, of course, I thought that Dwarves with Tempest Eye allies were on that same level of the Chaos and the Stormcast stuff. So that's what I took, was Dwarves with Tempest Eye, because I really thought it was, you know, right on that list, that tier right below the two really scary things that you could still absolutely win a tournament with. And then I was thinking, said in a few videos, solving the destruction puzzle box is really hard. You know, I was thinking that Iron Jaws were competitive, but I couldn't figure out what the best way to run them was. Gits are clearly really good, but it's just really hard to figure them out right now. Some really interesting potential solutions came out of this tournament from that. So my first round was on ley lines against Lawrence. I didn't get a picture of him, sadly, but he had some really incredible vintage high elf proxies that he was using as his Lumineth. Loved to see that. Now, the thing about ley lines, my list is essentially designed to win ley lines. I really wanted to win round 1 because that's basically the thing that puts you in contention for a tournament. Once you do that, kind of everything is, you know, you're on track. And so, you know, I think my list is maybe not unbeatable in ley lines, but it's extremely strong in ley lines. And you could kind of tell in this game, I'll be honest. I won by quite a bit. However, there were some really interesting things that came out of Lawrence's list that I really liked. Shining Company was surprisingly relevant. That's the ability that the sort of military Lumineth guys have, where you can do -1 attack against them if you can pop it if there's 3 of them in a group, and then they still get sort of the benefit from them. Even if one of them falls, you still get your Shining Company. So I thought it was really good. It made them a lot harder to kill all day, sort of on the center objective. I thought it would be kind of hard to organize, essentially, but my opponent was able to, get it working really well, I thought. Sharp-Eyed Scryhawk is still really decent. Giving +1 attack to everything is good. I would say, though, I think Blade Lords were a bit of a liability for my opponent in this game. Both my Mizzen Master and my Thundercat were extremely efficient about being able to kill those Toughness 3 Blade Lords. The Wardens were a little bit better just because my opponent wasn't paying very much points for them. They had, the 3-inch reach, which was nice, but my two big sort of hammer pieces were both sort of very efficient at killing sort of the Lumineth, which other than the Wardens weren't very cheap, right? So my Thundercat was just an absolute MVP in this game, just kind of holding the center of the board, letting my dwarves run around, claiming more objectives than my opponent, and I was able to take this one down. I really like Lawrence. He, first of all, again, for the high elf proxies, just true class, really fun. And then he just had a great attitude of like, I'm just coming here. He was a late addition to the tournament, and just coming to have fun and play some models that you might not get to play in many other places. Round 2 was a really interesting, really tough one. So this was against Terrorgeist Flesh Eater Courts, with some really interesting stuff going on. So this is Jason. I podcast with him once a month on the Tabletop and Beyond podcast. Listen to them. They also podcast about other games as well. They have like role-playing games, stuff like that. They podcast about all sorts of stuff. Jason ended up taking second place. I was his only loss. So since I got third, I claim second place. It's mine. If you want it, you have to take it. The thing that was cool in this match, so the Terrorgeist was really interesting. Right away in round 1, Jason got to go first. He basically said, I think if the Thundercat gets it, I'm not sure if I can hunt it down and kill it at all, because there's too many places here where you can use terrain to stop my Terrorgeist from jumping onto it. So he immediately just went and sat on the treasure. Monsters can't pick up treasure, but he made sure that I couldn't pick it up either. And then he kind of hung his ghouls behind the monster so that I couldn't just try to wrap around and try to table him, or like table everyone but the monster, right? So it kind of forced me to try to throw everything I had at the monster. I did finally kill it in round 2. And then the real game started, right? He immediately swooped in with a ghoul, took the treasure, ran away, and then in round 3, I had a really lucky rampage. Well, I didn't get lucky on any of the rolls of the rampage, but I got lucky that I did have it in round 3. And my Mizzen Master was able to sort of run away, basically kill something, disengage, and then take the treasure and rampage, not using the attack part and just getting a free move to get out of there. Now, this is where I think Jason was really impressive here. A lot of people, Jason made a quick comment like, oh, I think that's game. And it was only round 3, and it was like early in round 3 too. And then a lot of people from that point will get rattled, will sort of start making mistakes, go kind of halfway. They'll be like, well, that's game, but I think I need to try to chase the Mizzen Master anyway because that's the only way to win. Or like maybe they just like do some YOLO stuff. And he immediately pivoted to trying to kill all of my Arcanauts to make sure that he salvaged a minor out of this because he wanted to, he needed to kill half my warband to get a minor victory. And so that's basically the reason he took second place from me. Because if I get the full points from a major victory there, then he gets fewer points, and then both of us ending 3-1 in that tournament, I would have taken second and he would have taken third, or he might have even tumbled to fourth. So those sorts of the edges that you get from not getting rattled to essentially playing to your outs, right? Just maximizing the number of points you get every round. Those are really big for placing well in tournaments and winning tiebreakers, right? If this had been sort of a big tournament with tons of people, that would have been really relevant. And, they gave fun little prizes to everyone in the top three. I got some chosen axes here, and if he had tumbled to fourth, he wouldn't have gotten a sweet Shadespire warband. So interesting things to think about with competitive play. Jason also, I thought, was really brilliant as far as understanding the sort of what's going on in second edition. I think he understood it better than anyone at the tournament, including the eventual champion. He used his ghouls extremely effectively as far as their reactions are concerned. I didn't see anyone really not just remember to use reactions. That's one thing that actually people did miss. I forgot to use reactions multiple times in this tournament. But the first step is remembering to react. But the second step is actually sort of positioning ghouls smartly so to maximize your chances of an effective reaction. And he did that really well. Obviously, in the list building phase, he understood the role of monsters and the importance of monsters. In his 3 wins, 2 of them were just total blowouts where it just wasn't even close. And then the last one he said was more of a chess match. But, basically, if you can win 2 games just at the list building stage in a tournament, that's exactly where you want to be. And he did that by just recognizing the importance of monsters really early so that he could, put the finishing touches on his and make sure that he played it in the tournament. All of that is just, really important to do. I do think he also, when we were talking after the game, he wasn't being like, oh, if I'd done this, I would have beaten you. But he was thinking that he wished he had taken a different line of play using more weight activations to try to fight the activation wars. I had tested against monsters a lot, and I came into it with a real plan for what I was going to do against the Terrorgeist. And he had not yet played... he had played with his monster, but he hadn't played yet against someone who knew what they were doing against a monster, who didn't panic against a monster, because I didn't panic. And I think, there's that Game of Thrones line of they'll hit us hard and they won't run away when we hit them back, right? I think he hadn't played against someone who didn't run away when he hit them back. And immediately after the end of the game, he was interesting. So that's the correct way to play against a monster. Now I need to think about how I would play against someone who is playing correctly into a monster. And I think if we played again, I'd be really worried about winning this game. So yeah, just lots of props to Jason. Incredible list. He deserves second place, absolutely, even though it is pretty funny that I got third despite beating him. Great tournament for him. Round 3 was against Andy. He won Best Painted, and apparently it was a pretty big landslide. I definitely put him as one of my 3 nominations for Best Painted. Just a absolutely incredible, not just the display board, although the display board is pretty good. You can see, you actually can't really see in this picture quite how well it was painted, but it's just very smooth blending on every muscle in the Beasts of Chaos. It's interesting, Darcy won Best Painted at Adepticon also with Beasts of Chaos, and I think of them as being really old sculpts and not that great, but the one thing that they do allow you to do, there's a lot of big muscles on those Minotaurs, And a good painter like Andy, like Darcy, can really show off with just their ability to paint skin tones, and in this case, like off-color skin tones, like non-human skin tones, um, but still sort of obeying all the rules of skin tones, but being a different color. You can really show off with Beasts of Chaos, even though the sculpts are not very good. They give you a really interesting canvas as sort of a high caliber painter. So yeah, incredible work from Andy there. Also a really good player. His blood kinds were extremely effective. They just have incredible stopping power. Andy played very aggro in rounds 1 and 2, and those were actually the rounds that I won. I was kind of able to punish him for being really super aggressive. This was also a game, though, where we both rolled kind of garbage quite a bit of the time. So he got really unlucky and left my Thunder Prime on 1 life. And I also, I had a Mizzen Master with Onslaught active attacking his Great Bray Shaman twice. And so, 5 dice, 2s and 5s. So 10 dice total on 2s and 5s, hitting on everything except for 1s and 2s, and I only dealt 6 damage to it. I had a roll where there were 4 2s. It was just wild. So we were both just getting really unlucky with our rolls. I also at one point left one of his Bestigor on 1 life, and that ended up punishing me later. So I ended up winning 3-1, but this was kind of a bizarre game, and I'm interested to see if both of us rolled a little bit more average instead of both of us rolling terrible, like how it would have played, because like he ended up feeling like he had been beaten by a lot, but it felt really close to me, because our rolls were both so weird. One thing I will note, my old guard was absolutely my MVP, purely on running away. I was actually talking with some folks on Dayton Warcry, a podcast that you should definitely listen to. Warren from that podcast loves Reaper. He loves the cat and mouse of running away. I absolutely think there's a ton of strategy to Reaper, but I think the running away is so silly. I don't love that it incentivizes running away. But I will say that my old guard was extremely good at running away. Swift as the wind. When you need to get a lot of dwarves out and away from a blood kind very quickly, Swift as the wind is great at that. So props to the old guard, and again, painting props to Andy. Just an incredibly painted force. Now we have to talk about the damn finals. So, one, I was really happy to be in the finals. To go 3-0 over my first 3 games was really exciting. I was really happy with my list. I think it was very effective. But I was against the end boss of Warcry, Adepticon co-champion. Shoutouts to Riley and Kyle, who are also co-champions with him. But Dr. Justin Thundercat Orton. He was playing a Destruction Soup list, technically Gits, but it was Gits with like 600 points of not Gits in the list. There was a Mega Boss, there was a Gorgrunta, it was 700 points of not Gits in the list. There was a Mega Boss, a Gorgrunta boss, and a Trogoth in the list. And those were his hammer units. He actually didn't do any of the Gits hammer units, which I actually think the Gits hammers are really good. But he just completely declined to use them, which I thought was really interesting and a really savvy way to take advantage of the new list building rules, and really effective. Some kind of interesting back and forth in this game. The mission, it's the one where there's sort of 3 objectives and you take turns removing one, but it doesn't matter how you're doing on the objectives from round 1, 2, and 3. It all goes all just at the end. It's all just whoever's on the last objective at the end. I do think whoever removes an objective second has a slight advantage here, and that was him for this game, but that's not the only reason he won. There were a lot of kind of give and take things. The thing I learned was that his list has a ton of hitting power. That the Mega Boss is just like mind blowing how much it can put out. And unfortunately for me, my Thundercat really underperformed this game. I had a few kind of unlucky situations of leaving Gits at 1 life. I overcommitted with my Mizzen Master. I just went down to prey on a netter to make sure that he wouldn't be able to net me later on, and I only dealt 5 damage to it, and they do 6, or maybe I only dealt 4 damage to it, and they need 6. So it survived, and then his Mega Boss was able to... he rolled a rampage. He had a couple rampages this game, actually, but he rolled a rampage and was able to sort of double move over to the Mizzen Master and then just kill it in 1 hit. And then he actually had a more after that, so he was actually able to go back to the action with 1 last move. So being able to one-shot kill the Mizzen Master is pretty wild. Certainly not very likely to get like 2 6s and a 4, but he was very likely to be able to kill it in 2 hits there, so it wouldn't have mattered. I still overcommitted and probably lost because of it. The other sort of turning point where I definitely also lost was he very smartly, right away, he was deployed kind of halfway in between the center of the board and where I would deploy round 2. You see a lot of people just play the board and not play what the board is going to be next turn. But he actually backed his netter away from the fight and away from his ability to kind of matter in the fighting that was happening in round 1 to make sure that it could net me no matter where I deployed. He put it right in the center of that place, so 6 inches, 6-inch range on the net, 4-inch movement, so he could get anywhere the next round. So then I kind of made a gamble where I deployed in combat with the netter so that I'd at least be able to kill it if I won priority. I did win priority because I rolled like all singles. But then, so I used an onslaught on a KO to just a regular Arcanaut to try to kill the netter. I was about 60% to be able to kill it in those 2 hits, and I left it on 1 life. And that meant I had to use another activation from another another of these damn Arcanauts, which meant that later it actually wasn't able to get all the way to the edge of the board to contest the final objective, and I would have been tied on objectives if I'd been able to do that. I also wasted a significant amount of movement from the Thundercat that was near it because I'd had to move Arcanauts near that netter. So a really savvy play by him that sort of tempted me to gamble, and when the gamble didn't pay off, that was essentially game right there. We ended up having some really interesting jockeying for position where he was in control, but I had outs and I was playing to the outs, and he was having a difficult time sort of ending my outs or like making it so I had no outs. And so I was sort of running with this maybe 20% chance to win in the final 2 rounds. And after getting essentially just thoroughly outplayed in the first 2 rounds, I actually think I might have played a little better in the second 2 rounds. But at that point, it didn't matter because he had weakened my position so much that I just wasn't able to catch up. So really impressive performance by Justin for this whole tournament. Incredibly innovative list building, incredibly sort of savvy play, at least when I played him, just like the way he opened with a real plan, whereas I kind of didn't plan very well until later in the game. At this point, he has entered 3 competitive Warcry tournaments and won 2 of them, which is pretty wild. He just has really incredible spatial awareness. I want to tell this story. We went out to dinner later, me, him, Warren from the Dayton, Ohio Warcry podcast, a buddy of mine named JJ. We went out to dinner and we were on this patio, and he'll be talking to someone will be talking to him, and he'll be looking them in the eyes, and a fly will like land on someone else's meal, and he'll just swat the fly like without breaking eye contact with the guy he's talking to, and he'll hit the fly. Which is wild to me. So his spatial awareness, I think, is just like very, very high. Like, I don't think it takes much brain power for him to just like understand geometry and understand space. And I think that that's why he's so good at Warcry is he just has a really good understanding of that. So he just plays really well, and I think he just understands where he should be on the board in sort of changing circumstances just really, really well. He also, I think, noticing his play, having watched him a few times, he values base size and body blocking a lot more highly than most players do. And I don't know if that's replicable for most people, but I do think it's really interesting, and I think it's worth trying out in your games. Just like playing around with different base size models and seeing if you can make that matter. So, sort of, this made me think of a lot of, where are we essentially with the meta emerging out of 2.0. I still think because of Jason's incredible performance with that Terrorgeist, I think Chimera lists are still the scariest thing in the game. I think Chimera lists are really, really good. It's wild. I can't wait to try Chimera Nurgle. I have some tweaks from the list I gave a couple weeks ago that that I want to try, but I just think, man, he went 3-1, and it was like a pretty easy 3-1 as far as those things go. Like two just like total beatings. The one game that he lost against me, I think if we played that game 10 times, I think he wins 5 or 6 of them. I think, I think he'd be able to figure out that Terrorgeist to maybe do some things now that he's seen like how to correctly play against a Terrorgeist. I think he'd have some responses for how to counter that type of strategy. So I think Chimeras are really, really scary. I think that this Destruction Soup situation has legs. I think what made Justin's list so good, and so good in his hands, was that he had a ton of relevant doubles. The Iron Jaws charge, which is just a free movement, that on the Mega Boss or on the Gorgrunta boss is just incredibly relevant. The net is incredibly relevant. And then he had a Brugit in his list that could give +2 attacks to any model he wanted. And that on any of his 3 hammers would just like pump them into the stratosphere and make it so that his hammers always had the advantage against other people's hammers. So for example, my hammers probably were the best in the game at hunting chaff. And I value that quite a bit, just in general. And I've always valued that in this channel. And it served me really well throughout the tournament. I think it's the reason I won on Reaper. It's the reason I won so easily on Ley Lines. It is the reason I won on Cursed Relic, right? I was able to easily kill a ghoul, run away. I was, very highly value having hammers that kill chaff. He had a list with hammers that kill hammers, and he had basically everything in the list was about neutering opposing hammers. He had the nets to do that. He had the Git's reaction, which lets you, if something comes near one of his Gits, he's able to then bring his Gorgrunta boss flying into combat from really far away. His his Mega Boss has to be really close, but the other ones can just be really far away and come into combat. So he has this ability to just make sure that his hammers are always winning the fight against other hammers. I was talking with Peter Merson-Cabbage, who came in second at Gen Con, another guy who really knows what he's doing, and he was talking about how the Git's reaction is really hard to build around because it lets you basically teleport your big hammers into combat, but it then makes them vulnerable, right? So you get more attacks than you would otherwise, but also you get attacked more. Justin was able to essentially unlock that by bringing in Iron Jaws who can take the hits. So he can teleport these Iron Jaws into combat. Not teleport, but he can like rush these Iron Jaws into combat with his reaction, and then they can take a hit, and then when they hit twice, they're in a great position. So that is kind of really interesting as far as using the Gitz reaction, but not with the Gitz hammers, which are good, but instead of using the Gitz hammers, using Iron Jaws hammers, using a Thrall, stuff like that. So I think he's really unlocked something with Destruction Soup, and I think it's going to be really interesting to see if other people try that out going forward. Now, you can also check out all these lists on BCP. They're all public and live right now. I will be doing a list review show, though, as well next week. As far as the Tier 2 of the metagame, I think it's still about where it is. Dwarves with Tempest Eye allies, and I think the OC Bone Reapers version with Flesh Eater Courts. Both of those I think are solidly in that slightly lower tier, very capable of winning a tournament, very capable of beating either of the two S tier lists on any given day. I still think Chaos Lead from the back blenders are good, even though we didn't see any at this tournament. I still think Soulblight Gravelord Swarm is good, even though we didn't see any at this tournament. Though I will say there are a lot fewer mission types where Swarm really dominates now. There's a lot where it's kind of winner take all at the very end of the fourth round, where having a Swarm list, they just have a lot of opportunities to sort of pick apart your Swarm. So yes, I think the Soulblight Gravelords list is probably unbeatable on, some of the early objective missions. I think like Ley Lines, it's probably unbeatable, but some of the other missions, I think it might be a little tougher. I still think it's very good, though. I still think Stormcast Eternal's mid-range is very good, even though, once again, we didn't see any of that. I am going to be playing all Vindictors at the narrative tournament. I don't think all Vindictors is competitive. I think you need to have some other utility in there. But it's going to be really fun anyway. And then I think Terrorgeists and Zombie Dragons, they're just this like almost as good as a Chimera thing, and so I think they're just like solidly in this tier 2 band of just really solid stuff that you've got. And then the new wild cards, one of my patrons, goes by Echo Online, created a really interesting Sylvaneth list with no allies. It was the only honest list, quote honest, but with no allies or monsters in the top 4. And he only had hammers, nets, and teleports, and that's it. And it's just like condensed into the component important parts of Sylvaneth, and I just think it was really brilliant. He went 3-1 with that. I think he may have unlocked something with Sylvaneth there, and it was actually a very similar list in some ways to Justin's list, in that his hammers don't hit as hard as the Destruction Soup hammers do, but what he has is incredible options with any dice roll, any sort of opening initiative roll where you just, your abilities are randomized, and you can have a sort of list like mine where I have these all sorts of triples available to me where I can do Swift as the Wind, and that's a really strong triple. I can do, what do we even call it? Fight for Profit, which is a really strong triple that just like boosts my attacks into the stratosphere that the Mizzen Master can do. And I really value triples because the universal triple isn't very good, and so I feel like I can always use Onslaught if I get doubles, and I can always use Rampage if I get a quad, so I'm not interested in building around doubles and quads. But now that is a really good strategy, and it worked well for me, but these lists that have like multiple nets to use instead of Onslaught, that have these teleports, Echo teleported with a treasure, and his opponent actually got really mad, which is too bad. They made up by the end of it, but he thought it was just like wildly unbalanced that you could do that, because it specifically says like you get -2 movement, you can't fly anymore with a treasure, but there's nothing in the game, nothing in the rules that says you can't teleport. So seeing him teleport with the treasure to win Cursed Relic was pretty wild. So there's just a lot you can do with the Revenants in Sylvaneth right now, and they all got +2 wounds, right? So they just have a tiny bit more staying power. So there's a lot to like, and I'm interested to see if people sort of take that Sylvaneth list and run with it. I'll definitely be sort of going more in depth with the Sylvaneth later. So the main thing, though, I think I want to express is we're not done innovating, right? We don't know what these Chaos Lead from the back blenders need to look like. We don't know what these Stormcast midrange lists need to look like. We don't know if there's juice in the Orlan Warden tank, right? Because I think most of Lumineth mostly got a nerf bat, but Wardens, I think, are legitimately good with their 3-inch reach. So I think there's a lot to innovate with. And this list I've put of sort of the power players in 2.0 right now, in 6 months it could look totally different. It could have things added in. Some of these things could be much more specific. I'm very, very excited to see kind of where that goes. I just want to do some final reflecting on my list. First of all, my Thundercat was very good, but I don't love the high variance attack profiles. It's 4 attacks, 2s on regular hits, 6s on the crits. Now it is strength 5, which is really good, so you get a lot of hits, but you're really fishing for crits even though you have strength 5. So a lot of the time it would overkill by like 12 damage. I would have to, I'd have something that had 8 health, and I would 20 it. And I'd be like, well, that was pointless. And then a lot of the time it would wildly underperform too, because I'd have something where it's like, all right, I have to do 20 damage in 2 attacks with Onslaught, so I've got 10 dice, and I just, I'd only get 1/6. And so I wouldn't do any damage, even though, on average rolls you do it, I just wouldn't get there. And sometimes I would just wildly underperform and just do 8 damage over 2 attacks, and just because I didn't get any 6s. So I would prefer, if I could have my way, I'd prefer sort of a less variable one. So the 330 point Thundercat has 5 attacks, and the attacks do a little less damage, but having 5 of them, it averages out to a similar, I think slightly higher, I can't remember, but I just like it a lot better because, rolling 5 dice obviously is just better than rolling 4, and that variance was very frustrating to me, and, it was good. It was my MVP in some games. It got me to the finals. My list was great, right? But it's not my favorite compared to all 3 of the other Thundercat profiles. I think I prefer to the Thundercat that I ended up playing. Now, Tempest Eye allies. Swift as the Wind is very, very good. It's just as good as advertised. There was a lot of kind of theory crafting that maybe, is the ally mechanic overblown? Is it too good? I would say it is. I'm not saying it's too good, because there's a lot of other things that are really good in the game right now, but it is extremely good. And if you're playing Order, I think you need a good reason not to have a Tempest Eye ally, honestly, which I don't like. In fact, I was sort of a big voice against the ally mechanic in 1.0 when it was kind of unclear what Games Workshop was doing with it, or whether they wanted it to be in tournaments. In 2.0 they made it very clear, we want everything. We want all the allies, all the thralls, all the monsters, and I think it's awful, honestly. I don't like what it does to list building in Order, or Destruction, or Death, or I don't know. I just don't like what I think you are sort of you need to be souping. You need to be souping, and that part's too bad. But as far as this list goes, it was very good. Play Old Guards, play any of the dwarf ones are good, and then also that crossbowman, the elven crossbowman, all of these Cities of Sigmar Tempest Eye options. You've got 6 or 7 really good ones that you can play around with, but I think you need a good reason not to have a Tempest Eye ally if you're in Order. The KO actual part of this list was solid. The Mizzen Master is very good at as a chaff hunting hammer. For 250 points, it does tend to lose to other 250 point models or even 220 point models. So that part is very relevant and something you need to keep in mind. It's not a hammer that can fight other hammers. It is a hammer that needs to be grabbing the gold. It needs to be clearing chaff. It is a utility hammer. And as long as you play it very carefully, you'll be fine. But if you play it thinking that he's a brawler, he's just not a brawler. And so, you just have to be very careful with the Mizzen Master if you end up net listing my list. Don't just like run forward with him or you're going to have a bad time. If I had done that, I would have definitely lost both my round 2 and my round 3 if I had sort of played the Mizzen Master as a real attack piece. So yeah, just don't do that. Otherwise, it's good. It's a really powerful piece as long as you use it right. The Arcanauts were really solid. 250 points of Pistoliers I think felt about right. Like you could get a lot of hammers in a list for 250 points, but I liked having shooting all over the board. I liked having, they're actually pretty hard to kill for their points. 12 wounds is a lot for 50 points. So being able to have staying power on objectives, they were actually, I'd say, my MVP in the it was in the round I lost in the 4th round, but the only reason it was even close towards the end of the game was that my Arcanauts were just doing very well and messing around, and if those points had been spent on another hammer somewhere else in the list, I would have just been blown off the table immediately by the 2nd round. So 250 points of them felt about right, and then the Spearman was good. Having him next to the Old Guard was definitely the right decision, so that I could kind of rush him up into places, and he really does legitimate damage, and that was really helpful. So as far as if you want to play this list, my Adepticon list went 3-1. That was my Skaven list, but it wasn't a good list. There were just a lot of better Skaven lists out there that you could do, and I don't think you would have ever been favored to win a tournament with it. This list is very good, and I do think you could win a tournament with this list. I'd be perfectly happy to recommend this for someone who's trying to play or has a tournament that they want to try to win, or is just interested in the competitive side of the game. I think that this list is very scary. I think a lot of people came away from playing against it being like, I'm not sure what the solutions are to it. Now, obviously, Justin had the solution, but I do think, and maybe Justin might prove me wrong on this, but I think that the matchups between our lists would be very mission dependent. Like on something like ley lines, I think I'd be hugely advantaged against him, but I think I think he was slightly favored, was slightly better set up for the mission we did play on, and he played very well too. But I do think that this list gives you a chance to win against literally anything, except maybe a Chimera. Even the things I said that I was soft to, yes, I didn't play against any of them, but I did play against one monster and I did end up beating it, but even the things I felt like I was soft to, I still had game against them, or would have, did in testing, things like that. So yeah, feel free to play it. I think it's great. I almost won the tournament with it, and I did win a little box of Fire Slayers, so I'll be trying out Fire Slayers lists for sure in the future here. So I'll be, once this Oslo tournament that's happening basically as we speak, or it's Friday, so tomorrow, once this Oslo tournament happens tomorrow, I will do a list building extravaganza with all the 3-1 or better lists from both tournaments, and I think we'll learn a lot there. So until then, may all your rolls be crits.